Welcome everyone to my YouTube channel in Montum Sanctum on the Holy Mountain. And it's good to have the opportunity to share with you today. And really do appreciate your comments on my past videos. I always read them and pray over them, and I thank you for them. So please continue to support me in my ministry of outreach, where from a life of a hidden life of prayer, I seek to support you, and I know you will by your prayers too. For there is in the heart of every person created by God an inner disposition that we towards Him who made us. But we can only respond to Him and receive the channel, drink from the channel of divine grace if we understand the priority of prayer over everything, or put it another way, the priority of love. God, who calls us all to Himself, calls men and women in different ways. And I want to reflect further today upon the vocation and call of the hermit or anchorite. For if we are to believe sincerely that prayer underlies everything that we do as Christians, then we understand that the priority of prayer must take place in the hearts of the Christian community and of the church as a whole. And insofar as that takes place, then the church is fruitful. But when action and social activity takes priority over prayer, then we see the spiritual deprivation. What is a hermit and anchorite? It's somebody who God calls to live a hidden life as a sign of contradiction and a witness to the life that every Christian is called. In other words, to witness to the priority of the eternal in the present. If we look upon the history of the vocation of the hermit, we can go back, of course, to the early Christian centuries of the Desert Fathers, who withdrew into the deserts because they wanted to strengthen and affirm their faith in the face of the onslaught of a decadent society and a Christianity that to some degree had lost its fervour. You might say that's more pertinent today in a secular society that has abandoned God altogether, and a church that so often speaks about things but doesn't live things authentically as the body of Christ. The Hermits and Anchorites of Britain. We have records early about many men and women who withdrew to live such a life. We can go back to the Celtic period, the early Christianity in Great Britain, in certainly time of Venerable Bede in his ecclesiastical history speaks about the hermits of different places. We have many records from early bishops' registers about men and women receiving the blessing of the bishop and making their vows to the bishop, so that the church canonically values and approves such a life as being vital to its existence. So these men and women, they were often lay people. They weren't necessarily priests or religious. Sometimes, if it were a priest, he would ask leave of his bishop to leave the parish ministry to live such a life. Or if the man or woman was a religious, they would seek permission from their superior to live such a life. And where did they live? They lived in all sorts of places, in forests, woods, in inaccessible places very often, um, but not always so. Many hermits lived in an urban setting, in cities, or on the edge of towns. So there was no special place where a hermit lived, but the important thing was that the life was safeguarded from intrusion, and that the church officially did all it could to help the hermit be faithful to his or her vocation, following a particular rule of life. And that was drawn up in consultation with the bishop. There are a number of studies, books about the history of hermits and anchorites in Britain. A seminal work which was published in 1914 by Rotha Mary Clay, called The Hermits and Anchorites of England, is still regarded today as a seminal work if you want to learn more about the history of hermit and anchorite life in England. Later, a more recent book with a similar title by E.A. Jones also chronicles and adds to Rotha Clay's work with more information, more recent documents that have been discovered. So we can see that in Great Britain, in many different places and many different settings, with the blessing of the church, the hermit or anchorite was at the heart of the community. Paradoxically, a life of withdrawal, a hidden life, was actually regarded by the Christian community as central, and received the support. He or she received support not only from the ecclesiastical authorities, but also from the local parish community. You see, in medieval times, particularly, religion, the practice of the faith, underlay all life. And so the hermit or anchorite's life was understood and valued. Perhaps today, less so, and that's only because we live in a time where we've got secular and perhaps to a degree ecclesiastical disorientation. But many people in their lives certainly seek the other, transcendent, and the hermit and anchorite tries to bear witness in their lives to that otherness of God. You see, God is both other, beyond, but also intimate, nearer and closer than we think. So, what about the Hermits and Anchorites of Great Britain in early and medieval times? Well, as I said, they were men and women of all types of life. Um, they received the support of their local community, and they were valued by the official church. But they were just answering that call of the Lord to follow him in a literal way. They weren't claiming a superiority over other Christians. They were just being or trying to be faithful to that call to go into the desert, and metaphorically, to seek him whom their heart desires and whom the Lord calls. So in early uh, Celtic and medieval England, hermits were everywhere. You only have to think about, for example, the city of Norwich, which is famous, of course, for being the home of Julian of Norwich, Mother Julian of Norwich, who was a famous anchorite. Well, she wasn't the only one. In fact, there were probably, we have records of at least 2 dozen other hermits in different parts of the city receiving the support of the citizens there. But that was true all over England and Wales and Scotland. And we have, as I say, records of these hermits, where they lived, the type of place where they lived, what kind of support they received from the local community. And in the cases of 3 particular hermits or anchorites, and I'll talk in a minute about the distinction between a hermit and anchorite. We have 3 famous English mystics who were hermits. Certainly 2 of them were definitely hermits. Mother Julian of Norwich, Richard Rolle, and Walter Hilton. Mother Julian wrote, of course, her famous Revelations of Divine Love, where in the year 1463 she opened her heart and received these divine revelations. That's a great spiritual classic. Richard Rolle, who wrote many works in Latin and in the vernacular, his most famous work is the Fire of Divine Love. And Walter Hilton, who wrote the spiritual classic, the Scale of Perfection. Now, we also have some lesser writings of other hermits, and so what's the difference then between an anchorite and a hermit? Well, not a lot in a way. Sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, but an anchorite is somebody who has is anchored in one place permanently. It's almost like a solemn enclosure, and they can't leave that anchor hold, as it were, without express permission from the bishop. Now, a hermit also has a hermitage, a place where they live. So they're not supposed to be roaming around everywhere. So they promise us a stability of place, but their places, it's more fluid. A hermit may move from one hermitage to another if there are special reasons for them to do so, perhaps for greater solitude, for example. So that's really the difference between the two. But sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. So they lived in many different locations and many different places, not necessarily remote from other people. Sometimes they did. But what often is the case is that a hermit or anchorite lived or sought to live as near as they could to a church. Sometimes there was even hermitage or anchor hold attached physically to the building of the church. There was a sort of an extension of a church of the church building where the hermit could look out of their hermitage through a window onto the sanctuary of the church where they could adore the Lord in the Blessed Sacraments. And but certainly a hermit or anchorite lived close to a church where they could, if it was a priest, he would celebrate Mass in private, or a layperson, they would be close so that they could be available on occasion um, to give spiritual comfort and direction for people seeking advice. So the location can be many different places, but certainly usually near or even attached to a church. So you might think that this is all something in the past, but it is true that today in the church there are hermits and anchorites. I am a hermit. I live a life with the blessing of my bishop in that tradition. I live in a house where I can look through my window to the church, a stone's throw away, and also I can use the church in times when uh, out of service times for private prayer or to celebrate Mass. The hermit is not somebody who is special, perhaps unusual, in that vocation is a rare vocation in a way, because but it is an essential part of the Christian and Catholic tradition. In recent times, um, there has been a revival in interest and in the number of people testing their vocation to such a life. So there we are, my friend. The life of the hermit and anchorite is one that just simply is a response to that call of God to bear witness with uplifted hands in prayer for the needs of the world and all men and women in the church, for the sick and for the poor, for those who have lost their way, for those who are struggling, for those who are seeking God. So there must be, in a way, a recognition if the church is to come to her through living stature and vitality, there must be a recognition that contemplative prayer lived in that particular vocation in that particular way is a vital witness in the heart of the church. So it's interesting to read, and I advise you, if you can, get a copy of that seminal work by Rotha Mary Clay called The Hermits and Anchorites of England. It was published in 1914, but it has been reprinted in paperback. I think you can get it quite easily. The Hermit and Anchorite also is popular in certain literature, for example, Arthurian literature, where in the quest for the Holy Grail, the Galahad and Lancelot often meet in a clearing in the forest a hermit who gives them advice and counsel as they proceed in their quest. In a sense, all Christians are like those Arthurian knights seeking the great prize of the Grail, the Holy Grail, which is really communion. Symbolically, the Holy Grail is the cup of the Last Supper, but in a sense, really, is fundamentally communion with God. And aren't we all seekers? Don't we wish all to be seekers? To deepen our communion with Him. It's the hermit who is, in a way, called to be himself or herself that signpost to seekers seeking greater communion in a life of prayer with the Lord. Well, my friend, thank you very much for listening to me today. I ask God to bless you where in your particular situation in life. Do not fear, do not worry, for few things matter in the end except the love of God, which conquers all things. Bless you.